All right, let's just jump right in. We're about to take a really close look at a core belief we all have about what it means to be ethical, especially at work. You know, we're always taught to follow the rules, check the boxes. But what if for a whole group of people, the most ethical decision is actually the one that asserts their own personal power, even if it breaks a rule? It's a pretty provocative idea, and that's what we're going to explore.
So this statement, this is pretty much the foundation of most corporate ethics programs, right? It's in our legal systems. It's even how we tend to raise our kids. Just follow the rules and you're doing the right thing. It's simple, it's clear, and it's how we build trust. But what if this whole assumption has a fundamental flaw?
And this is where our whole story really kicks off, with just one number, 0.2939. I know, it doesn't look like much, but this specific correlation, which was pulled from a global study, puts a huge crack in that bedrock assumption we just talked about. This little number points to a completely different way of seeing the world, and today we are going to decode it.
So here's our roadmap for this journey. We'll start with that compliance assumption, and then we're going to decode the contradictory signal that's hiding inside our mystery number. From there, we'll uncover the autonomy pattern it reveals, explore a whole spectrum of ethical models, and then see what happens when these systems collide. And finally, we'll look at how new tools, like AI, can actually help us navigate all this complexity.
Okay, so let's officially start by challenging that universal belief. We're really going to question the simple math that says following the rules is the same thing as making a genuinely ethical choice. Because as we're about to see, for a pretty significant chunk of the population, that equation just doesn't add up at all.
Now it's time to do some investigating. We're going to unpack the real story behind that 0.2939. Where did it come from? What is it telling us about the hidden wiring of our own conscience?
So this number, it comes from a study called the Algebra of Conscience. And what this study found was this positive correlation between people who disagreed with the statement, "one must not send a cheat sheet to a friend," and a very specific psychological profile. And this wasn't some small local survey. The data is from 201 people all across 47 different countries. The profile it's linked to? It's called the red vMEME. So what in the world is that?
This right here explains the mindset we're talking about. The red vMEME comes from spiral dynamics, which is a model of human development that describes these different worldviews. You can think of the red vMEME as sort of the warrior archetype, or the rugged individualist. It's all about power, respect, and the right to make your own choices. It doesn't ask, hey, what does the rulebook say? It asks, what do I want to do? This is a worldview where your personal will is the ultimate authority, and you can probably already see how that might clash with a rigid, rule-based system.
And it's that clash that reveals this incredibly powerful pattern. See, this isn't just about breaking rules for the sake of it. It's about validating decisions through a completely different lens. It's a new validation model that's not based on compliance, but on autonomy.
Just look at this side by side. On the left, you've got procedural compliance. It validates a decision by asking a simple question. Is the rule being followed? The source of truth is totally external. But on the right, you have personal autonomy, and it asks, does this choice reflect my own power and will? The source of validation there is entirely internal. One is about adherence, the other is all about assertion.
So here's the crucial point. The data is telling us that as this red worldview gets stronger in a person, the importance of their own autonomy starts to completely outweigh the importance of following external rules when they decide what's right or wrong. It's like their internal compass becomes way more powerful than the external map. And the big takeaway here is that what your company measures as ethical might be completely, totally misaligned with how a significant number of your employees are actually thinking and making decisions. But this story isn't just about the red mindset. That's just one color in a much, much bigger rainbow. The truth is, we are all operating with different ethical lenses, and this dynamic plays out across a whole spectrum of human psychology. This table gives you a sense of it. Spiral dynamics lays out these multiple worldviews, and each one has its own unique ethical validator. For the purple vMEME, right and wrong are validated by tribal loyalty. For blue, it's that procedural duty we've been talking about. For red, it's power and autonomy. Then you have orange, driven by strategic outcomes, what works best. Green focuses on relational care and compassion, and yellow is about systemic calibration, what's actually appropriate for the context. Each one is asking a fundamentally different question when faced with an ethical choice.
Let's look at a really solid example for blue. There's a strong positive correlation for blue mindsets to agree that you absolutely must not give false evidence, even if it would save an innocent person. And you might ask, why?
Well, because for Blue, the procedure, in this case telling the truth under oath, is the absolute highest moral duty. The rule is the rule, no matter what the outcome is.
And now, here's one for Purple. A positive correlation for agreeing to punish someone more severely than the law requires, just to deter others. Now, this isn't about individual rights or the letter of the law. For that purple tribal worldview, it's about protecting the group. Making an example of someone to ensure the safety of the tribe, well, that's the highest ethical calling.
So, what happens when an organization, which is almost always built on a single, blue, rule-based ethical model, tries to manage a workforce that's full of purple, red, orange, and green thinkers? What happens when all these systems collide? Well, the consequences can be pretty severe.
You can see this chain reaction and how it all just falls apart. The organization insists on compliance. For those people who value autonomy, this feels like an attack, and it erodes their sense of self. The organization's single definition of ethical stops making sense to people, and that causes fragmentation. Then people start to resist the system, and all of a sudden, all those metrics you were using to measure ethical behavior, they become completely meaningless. They're just measuring box ticking, not genuine conscience.
And this quote from the source material just hits it right on the head. When there's a gap between what the system values, which is rule following, and what an individual values, whether that's personal choice or tribal loyalty, trust dies. That gap, that's where the entire social contract of an organization just breaks down.
So, we've seen how this misalignment can literally break a system. The challenge is, how do you possibly manage this kind of complexity at scale? I mean, this level of psychological diversity is almost impossible for a human leader to track. And that's where technology can offer a brand new way to see. There's a concept on the horizon called AI vibe coding. To put it simply, it's about being able to talk to an AI in just plain English to build really sophisticated tools that can analyze this kind of complex human data. You don't have to be a programmer. You just need to know the right questions to ask to spot these deep, hidden patterns. And this is what that can actually look like in practice. This is the UI for a tool called the SD Navigator, which is basically a leadership simulator. On the left, you can adjust these sliders for the psychological makeup of your team, the mix of red, blue, green, and other mindsets. And on the right, you can test different management actions, like reduce salaries or implement unpaid vacation. The model then predicts the impact on key psychological sensors like fear and trust. It's a way to make the invisible soul of a company visible, and more importantly, manageable.
And this really shows you the power of this approach. Instead of spending weeks building complex queries or hiring data scientists, a leader can just ask a question in plain English. The AI understands the context of spiral dynamics, it knows the data set, and it can instantly show you the exact patterns we've been talking about today. It turns a massive, complicated data set into an immediate, actionable insight.
Which leaves us with this final, and I think critical question. We have spent the last century building systems that measure and reward compliance. So what happens when we realize that for many people, we've been measuring the wrong thing this entire time? What breaks in our companies, in our leadership, and in our very understanding of trust when we finally start seeing autonomy not as a threat to the system, but as a vital signal of conscience itself?